friends. Thanks so much for joining me in this March episode. I'm really sorry if you can hear like clicking, clacking of nails on hardwood floor in the background at any point while I'm recording this. I've got the two dogs in the room with me today. Normally I lock them away, I put them in the bedroom with Andrew when I'm recording these videos, but Andrew's on a Skype call in the other room for his business, so you might hear noise in the background. I hope not. They're both quite settled at the moment, but we'll see how we go. But yes, in this video I've got a few things to chat to you all about. I've got some sewing, so the Hudson joggers, which I'm currently wearing, that I'll show you. In the sustainability section I've got a cutlery roll that I sewed that I'm going to show you. Small business section I'm going to have a chat about my brand values, and then in the self section I've got a podcast and some knitting to show you. And then interspersed, hopefully there'll be some clippies of us walking around Edinburgh. I think there's some daffodils, maybe blocking a scarf. That might be this episode or it might be next month's episode. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me again, and let's get cracking. So in the sewing section, I wanted to have a chat to you all about some joggers that I've made recently. I think it's fairly official, isn't it, unanimous, that 2020 was the year of the sweatpant. And annoyingly, I do this a lot with sewing. I tend to kind of put off sewing things that I actually need, and sort of focus on things that are fun or new or simple, like things that I can make in sort of one sitting without a pattern, that kind of thing. And that's fine. I understand that I do this hobby partly to relax, so it's important that it's something that it isn't too stressful, and obviously there's a time and a place for a complicated pattern like a pair of jeans. And then there's a time and a place for a nice simple, like a sweatery fashion or something you can do without even having to look at a pattern, sort of thing. And the Hudson pants for me kind of bridged that gap, where I have made them before. I've made them once, I think, maybe twice. And I basically chose the wrong fabric the first time round. It wasn't stretchy enough, and it was this thrifted, I think maybe 80s kind of poly blend, and it was just really not nice, like a bit sweaty and like not stretchy enough, like I say, and it was just a bit of a disaster, and it kind of put me off because this pattern is supposed to be quite simple. I've got it here, that's why I keep looking down. I'm actually not sure if True Bias has a sort of simplicity mark, you know how some of them have like 4 out of 5 stars or 1 out of 5 for how like simple or not they are, but I think it's kind of universally known as being a fairly simple pattern, so it sort of annoyed me the first time that I'd made them and they hadn't really turned out particularly well, and a lot of that was my fault. It was fabric choice. I still struggle with that, like however many years later, and you know, however many other sewing projects under my belt, I can still totally fuck up a pattern by using completely the wrong fabric, and I always find that frustrating because I feel like I should know better by now, do you know? Anyways, so it's taken me a little while, but I finally got round to picking this pattern up again, and I really wish I'd done it like a year ago, because for the last 4 or 5 years since that last failed pair, I've only had one pair of joggers, and they were a pair that I bought, like, I'm not even exaggerating, it would be over 10 years ago. It was my first year of university at vet school, so that was 2008, 2009, and I remember because I bought this really wide-legged pair of joggers because for some stupid reason I thought I would join the women's rugby club. So I joined the women's rugby club, lasted about 3 months before I was like, fuck this shit, I'm going to get my face smashed in or my fingers destroyed. And much as I obviously need my fingers to do like surgery and whatnot, I also need my fingers to do knitting and sewing and things that I'm really passionate about. So I dropped out after I think a term. Anyways, I bought these wide-legged tracksuit bottoms basically to get changed in and out of at the side of rugby pitches, so I didn't have to kind of stand around in the cold wearing these short shorts. So I would pull these joggers on over the top, but because they were quite wide-legged, so I could get them on and off without having to like strip everything off or take my shoes off or whatever. Once I gave up rugby, I was like, these are a bit unfashionable, do you know, they were a bit like just not really my kind of style for kind of lounging around the house. So when the Hudson pants came out and I tried to make them the first time round and failed, I thought, you know what I could do though, so just in case you're not aware, they're a kind of taper leg, kind of slimmer leg jogger. It's like, I might apply this theory to this wide leg pair of joggers that I've got, so I don't have to remake the whole waistband section that I found difficult the first time round. I can just use it as a template for tapering off the leg and making a new ankle cuff. So that's what I did, and it was when I'd first got an overlocker, and I remember I did them in white thread inside, despite the joggers being navy, because I didn't know how to change my overlocker thread at that point. And I did a pretty poor job of the inner seam where the ankle cuff meets the inside leg. I did a pretty poor job of that, so there was like this kind of bunched up lumpy bit that looked a bit rubbish. But I persevered and I wore those joggers to literal death. Like, I still have them now. They've got paint on them, they've got a couple of holes in them. And yeah, for years they were literally my only pair of joggers. So I finally was like, I need to make some more joggers. This is ridiculous. Like, this is the year where everybody's at home and you can't go out and there's nowhere to go and nothing to do, and it seems ridiculous that I only own one pair of sweatpants. So I decided to remake the Hudson pants. That's the long rambling story of how we got to this point. So yeah, the Hudson pants, just in case you're unaware, are an indie pattern from True Bias. Yeah, True Bias. Sorry, this is how I store my patterns. They are, taper leg. The classic pattern is, I think, a kind of mid-rise, but True Bias Ali, I think her name might be, has a tutorial on her website on how to make them high-rise, which is what I did for this one. It's dead simple. She talks you through how to lengthen the appropriate pattern pieces. It comes with two views, the kind of standard size view and a crop leg view. I've not actually made the crop leg view. I thought they'd be good for running, just haven't got around to it. It'll take me another 5 years to get to that point. And they've got pockets and, I'll show you on the front bit, pockets and a drawstring, elasticated waist. I haven't bothered with the drawstring. I personally have never bothered with drawstring joggers. I just don't see the point. Like, the whole thing is it's supposed to be easy to get on and off, right? So I don't want to be like fiddling around with a drawstring at the point where I'm trying to like pee or whatever. But I do understand. I've seen Marie from Stitch Odyssey has made a few of these recently, and hers look really cute with the drawstring. She's done it properly with like the metal, I'm not sure what they're called, eyelets maybe, where it's like a buttonhole but metal, and they look really professional. So I do see that it's like quite a cool design feature, but for me personally, like, that's a whole lot of hassle for a pair of joggers, like, nah. So yeah, that is the Hudson pants. I made, if I remember rightly, normally I ring in the size chart, normally I ring the size that I made, but I didn't for this. They go from a size 0, which is a 26-inch waist, up to a size 18, which is a 38.5-inch waist. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a size expansion now. I don't know for sure. You would need to check the website for that. But yeah, that isn't a massively inclusive size range, so I would expect there to be some kind of size expansion now. I bought this pattern like 5 or 6 years ago. Looking at what I've cut out, I have cut out the size 2, which is a 27-inch waist and a 35-inch hip. So I've sized slightly up on my waist and gone with my hip measurement, it looks like here. because it makes sense, like the waist measurement is a bit more flexible, right, because it's elastic, so you're pulling the elastic into size to fit your waist anyway. So obviously you don't want to like go massively higher than your waist measurement, but there's a bit more flexibility with the waist measurement than there is with the hip measurement, where there is an elastic to pull it in or let it out, sort of thing. So I guess if I were choosing this for someone, I would probably go for their hip measurement rather than their waist measurement, and then just use the elastic to fit to the waist as needed. So yeah, the pattern needs medium weight knits, so cotton lycra, French terry, ponte and sweatshirt knit, and she suggests a stretch of approximately 40%. I have to say I didn't check the stretch of my material, despite having the problem the first time round of picking fabric that didn't have enough of the stretch, because I clearly don't learn by my own mistakes. But yeah, that's partly why I made these, was because I need joggers, but because I also have an absolute ton of jersey in the shop at the moment, and I'm adding new stuff every week. I've got this massive job lot of jersey that I'm working through, and there is a lot of ponte and medium weight stuff there, so I thought good opportunity to make myself some joggers, and then obviously link in the show notes for you folks. If you decide you want to make some, you've got the option to as well. So I made them in this grey sweatshirting that I've got in the shop, so I'll link it in the show notes below. I think I cut myself 2 meters off the roll, mostly to keep the inventory as an even number, but I totally didn't need the full 2 meters. I have a decent amount left, so I'm actually thinking I might see if I can make maybe like a Linden sweatshirt or something, and then I could have like a whole matching outfit like I was in some kind of athletics club, and that would be cool. Or we just finished rewatching Battlestar Galactica, and they all have these like grey sweatshirts with the Battlestar Galactica logo patch on it, and I actually have a black patch that isn't Battlestar Galactica but is something similar, and it looks similar, I mean. And I thought I could make a grey sweatshirt and put the black patch on it, and then when I'm working out it'll be like I'm in Battlestar Galactica, because I'm a nerd, just in case that hasn't come across already. So yes, this is a kind of medium weight, I would say it's a medium weight ponte. I don't think I measured the stretch when I was choosing this, but it'll be on the original listing. It's at least 25%, I would say. But yeah, she suggests up to 40. I would say the stretch percentage with this fabric would totally fine for these joggers. I've had no issues at all with them. And then I just used some offcuts of navy jersey for the pocket detail. So I'll show you, I'll film one where I'm standing up so I can show you all the details and whatnot. So yeah, I just used an offcut of jersey for that, and I quite like a pattern that does that has those smaller details where you can use up a scrap of fabric, because I've always got scraps and remnants hanging around, and I think it's quite nice to have the opportunity to use them in something like productive, do you know? Like I don't really care about scrunchies, I don't really care about mobile phone covers. Like if I'm going to use up my scraps, it's going to be in something like a pocket lining or a colour block detail or something like that. Otherwise I'll just bag them up and send them to charity. So yes, that's the fabric I chose. I also have a second and a third version lined up. I can't show you the third version because the fabric is in a box which my laptop is currently sitting on to record this episode, and it took me ages to set this up, and then I realised that, and I was like, I'm not getting that out, sorry. It's just navy ponte. I'll link it below, but you don't need to see it necessarily. But I am quite excited to use this. It's like grey. Daisy's just appeared. Hi, baby. So yes, it's like grey, medium weight ponte again. Not 100% sure this will be stretchy enough, but I guess we'll soon find out. But it's really soft, and I've got quite a lot of this left in the shop, so again I'll link it below. Maybe by next month's episode I'll have finally made them and I can show them off to you, but that is my second option that I've got planned. Oh, you're coming up to join me? That's nice. That's nice. We might cut this bit out. Sorry about the Daisy related interruption. There's a chance she might try again. She's a bit confused because Andrew's on a Skype call in the other room. But yeah, so overall I would say this pattern is dead easy to to sew up. Now I've got an extra like 5 years experience under my belt. I definitely didn't find that so much the first time round, but yeah, certainly now I would consider myself an intermediate sewer. I didn't have any problems sewing this up this time. The one thing I did, now that I've said I had no problems, the one thing I did struggle with was the waistband, which I'll show you in the next video. But it's a waistband where you kind of fold it in half with the elastic enclosed in between, and then you zigzag, obviously stretching as you go, 2 lines of zigzag stitches that would then form the channel for your drawstring if you decided to do a drawstring. I found that really difficult, mostly because my sewing machine really struggled with it, so every time I would stretch the elastic within the waistband casing, it would kind of slip at the needle end of my sewing machine, so I end up with these big chunks where it's like missed 2 or 3 stitches and it doesn't look great. It does the job, so the only way to fix it, I think, because zigzag through like 2 layers of jersey and the elastic I think would be quite difficult to unpick without doing some serious damage. So I think if I was going to do it again, I would probably need to cut it off and start again from scratch, but I mean, it does the job. Like, it's not going to win any awards. It's not sewing bee like level, but it does the job. It keeps my trousers from falling down, and that's what I'm aiming for. And I've got 2 more versions planned, so I guess my plan would be to try and improve the standard next time. But at this point, anything is better than the shitty old like 15-year-old ex-rugby joggers that these are replacing, right? So it is what it is. So in the sustainability section, I wanted to have a chat about this cutlery roll. So I've been using this for about 18 months. I made this, about 18 months ago for myself when I had a job that involved commuting through to Glasgow. And often it involved eating my lunch in an office where I didn't really have easy access to cutlery or easy place to clean cutlery when I was done. So it was kind of easier, especially because I would always take my lunch with me, and it was often things like a salad. It was easier to take my own cutlery. So I made this cutlery roll. And I wanted to share it here with you because I think this is another fairly easy switch that a lot of us can make when we're allowed kind of back out and about into the world, obviously. I imagine transportable cutlery is probably not an issue right now. But yeah, pre-corona, if you worked in an office or, you had the kind of job where you often had to eat on the go, it's so easy to kind of fall into that trap of getting like an M&S salad that comes with a little plastic fork. And, you quite often at M&S especially, the fork isn't like built into the salad, how some of them have it built into the lid and you don't have the option but to take it. Places like M&S, they often have the plastic disposable cutlery separate, so you kind of have to pick it up if you need it, which in some ways is quite good because it means if you have your own cutlery, you have the option to not take the single-use plastic cutlery, which is great, better than the type where the cutlery is built into the product and then like you kind of have to take it if you want that salad sort of thing. But obviously the ideal would be to not have single-use plastic at all and instead have your own cutlery, and this was where this idea came for me. Was if I make a cutlery roll, it's small, it's lightweight, I can shove it in my backpack, I can always have it with me, so if I'm buying my lunch when I'm out and about because I'm commuting or whatever, then I've always got this with me. The other thing that I always try and carry now is a straw, because quite often if you stop and you get a takeout drink of some description, it'll come with like a plastic straw. Or, and this is kind of a good thing but not, oftentimes now they'll come with a cardboard straw, which is obviously better than a single-use plastic straw, albeit I think it depends on how the straw is made. Some of the cardboard straws are still coated with plastic, so that they don't just disintegrate, and then they can't easily be recycled, or they're not coated with plastic and then they literally just disintegrate like the moment they're in the drink. If you don't drink the drink instantly, like in the next 20 minutes, your straw just turns to mush. So yeah, this was something that I made for myself so I could start carrying my own cutlery around, and my own straw. So I'll show you. This was actually a belt that came with a pair of trousers years ago, and I wore the trousers a lot, but the belt was never really my thing. But I quite liked it. I think it's leather, or at least fake leather, that's fairly like realistic. I kept the belt, and then when I was looking for something to make this with, I just cut one end off and my sewing machine managed to sew through it, which was quite nice. So if I open it up, it's just your very simple, try not to cover my mouth, sorry, very simple like rectangle of fabric that you fold in three. So obviously 1/3 comes up and forms the pockets for the cutlery, and then the other third folds down and that becomes the cover for the cutlery. And then once you've folded it and covered everything, you then just literally roll it up from one end, and then just wrap the thing round and tuck it in itself to seal it. So yeah, it's dead simple. Like if you can sew a rectangle, you can basically sew one of these. So I just sewed the fabric with right sides together, leaving an opening at one end, and then turned it the right way out, and then top stitched around the edge to close my opening, and then I sewed up, I folded 1/3 up and then sewed it into quarters to create my 4 little pockets. So the cutlery that I chose is actually a really old camping set, so it's kind of, I guess, 2/3 normal size, but it's metal, and it fits quite nicely in there. The straws came with a water bottle, so I bought a water bottle that came with a set of plastic straws, which was quite nice. The downside is they're probably a little bit too long for this set, this cutlery roll, or if I'd known that I was going to have this length of straw, I would have made these pockets slightly longer. So that's definitely something I would say if you're planning on making one of these, is to measure the size of the straw or cutlery that you're going to put in it before you sew your pockets, so that you know that they're actually going to fit. I mean, it'll do to be getting on with, but yeah, just something worth considering. I lined mine with this adorable turtle print cotton that Andrew brought me back from a work trip to San Francisco a few years ago, and then the outside is just this green waxed cotton that I've had in my stash for years. I've made a fennel fanny pack out of it that I think you can see on Instagram, and I've made a Sierra tote project bag out of it as well, and I think I've still got some of it left. It came off Walthamstow Market, if I remember rightly. Anyway, so yeah, you just roll it up and then just tie the tie round, and obviously depending on how you want to make it, like I didn't use a tutorial for this, I just kind of eyeballed it and made it up as I went along, but I'm sure you can get actual tutorials online for it, but yeah, you could probably seal it here with maybe a button and a bit of elastic band, or a button and a buttonhole, maybe some Velcro, and obviously I use mine for cutlery from a sustainability point of view to avoid using single-use plastic disposable cutlery, or straws, but you could use it for whatever you fancied, right? Like embroidery, crochet hooks, knitting needles, jewellery, roll, like artist paintbrushes, like, sorry if you can hear Andrew in the background, I'm slightly distracted there. I was going to say artist paintbrushes, or drawing pencils, anything that like you can is long and thin basically, and that you want to take with you. I think one of these is a great shout, and this is really good for the kind of environmentalist in your life if you wanted to make it as a present, say, as well, because obviously it doesn't require any sizing. It would make a great stocking filler. You could make a cutlery roll with the cutlery inside it and give it to someone as a present, and that would be quite a nice, like someone who's leaving for a job that requires them to commute or whatever, that'd be quite a nice gift. But yeah, so that is my plug for the travel cutlery roll. In the small biz section, I wanted to have a chat about brand values. So this is one of those sort of slightly nebulous topics that I think can be quite difficult to kind of express. So apologies in advance if this section is even more rambly and random than these episodes normally are. But this is something that I've been thinking about on and off for a while now. When I ran a vet practice, I did part of a leadership and management course. I got about a year into an 18-month course and then ended up leaving that job, so I never actually finished it, which I'm slightly annoyed about now, just from the completionist part of me wants to have ticked that box. But it was quite useful, the sections that I did do, because one of the exercises that they had you do was think through your business and who you were as a leader and a manager and what kind of values you wanted to kind of, I don't know, like permeate through your business and to the people that you worked with and yeah, the kind of ethos of the place that your place of work. And you can kind of see from all of my like that I don't know, I found this subject quite difficult to kind of conceptualize. Like, it's quite a kind of nebulous idea. But I do think it's an important one, and I think especially when you think about brands that have a strong identity, I think it would be quite easy to sit and list 3 or 4 words that you would associate with that brand, and then you could go out to maybe like 10 people in the street and ask them the same question, and they would be able to come up with 3 or 4 very similar words to the ones that you'd come up with. So I think brands that have strong identity are... there's something about them that transmits to their customers that is kind of like the ethos of who they are as a company.
And I think that in some ways is quite important. Like when I was a leader and a manager, it was important to me because I wanted people that worked with me to feel those values. So I wanted to be, like inclusive and supportive, and I can't think of off the top of my head any others, but I wanted people that I worked with to feel like coming to work was a comfortable, happy place where they were supported to be the best versions of themselves and to achieve goals that they wanted to achieve. And so that exercise kind of really made me think about what are my overarching goals for the business, and myself, and then what are my goals for the people who work with me, and how I want them to feel coming to work. And then through working through that exercise, I sort of had to come up with like 4 or 5 kind of overall like brand values. And it was a tricky exercise, but it was useful at the time. So it was something that when I started the Etsy shop, I wanted to kind of emulate, obviously not to the same level as when I was running a vet practice, because I'm just a one-man business, a one-person business now, and it's a lot more simplified, it's a lot more streamlined. I don't need to worry about employees and how they feel about work because there aren't any, it's just me, and Andrew helps me occasionally with orders. But yeah, so it's from that point of view, I don't need to think about like my workplace and the ethos that I want to have in my workplace, but I still want my brand to be communicating something to my customers. And I think if I can sort of in my head think about what those values are now, that will help me make decisions about the business moving forward. So for example, when Andrew and I were first talking about this, I remember it was last summer, we took the Turtle, our camper van, away for its first trip, and we went to one of its first trips. We went to Glencoe, and we were driving down this country road, and we were having this conversation, and I wish I'd written it all down because it was a really good conversation, but when I revisited it recently, I was like, I can't actually remember half of the words that we thought of, but I could remember the kind of the gist of it, like the feelings and the sort of not the specific words, but the kind of group of words that we came up with that would represent my business. And one of the first ones that came up was a fairly obvious one of sustainability. So obviously my whole business is built around the theme of kind of reusing products that are already in circulation. So that idea of the kind of circular economy of, when things are produced, we should be thinking about how they're disposed of, and they should have this sort of 360-degree life cycle, ideally. And at the moment, for a lot of products, that isn't the case. And obviously textiles is an obvious part of that, where, often fabric is produced for a specific goal, like a range of clothing for a shop, for example, but not a huge amount of thought is put into what will happen to that clothing when it's reached the end of its life cycle, and what will happen to that fabric if it's not all sold, sort of thing. And I guess that's where my business fits in a very, very tiny, small cog way into that overall picture of my business is a way to use up some of those textiles that have been overproduced or left over, or have come from somebody's stash, or been used by an interior designer and then remnants at the end of a season, things that would otherwise have potentially just been disposed of, that can then come to me, and I can curate them and present them in a way that the home sewist can access, and then they can go on and be used by someone else and turned into clothing for that person to use. And then ideally I would hope that person would then go on and recycle that clothing when they were done with it, but obviously that's a step beyond my business. So, but yeah, I would say sustainability is obviously like the core of my business. Like that's why I set up my business in the first place, where I identified this niche in the market for unwanted textiles, and my business helps marry those unwanted textiles up with the final consumer, sort of thing. But also I would say the way that I run my business, I try to be as sustainable as possible. So I always use recycled products for packaging, or I use products that can be recycled. So like the paper labels or the twine string, like the customer at the other end could reuse them if they wanted to, or they could recycle them. Like the string is biodegradable, the paper is recyclable. You could reuse the envelope, and then once that person's reused it, then it could get recycled. So it could have at least 1 or 2 more uses as an envelope before it gets recycled. I use paper-based tape because I don't want to apply anything to the envelope that would then prevent it being recycled at the other end, and that's another reason why I haven't used thermal printers yet. So it would be a lot more time efficient to switch to a thermal printer, where if you imagine like on the front of your Amazon box, for example, the label that your details come on, that will have been printed on a thermal printer. But as far as I can tell in the research I've done, there isn't currently a recyclable thermal label that's been produced. So once the thermal label is on the cardboard, it technically shouldn't then be recycled anymore. And I don't know enough about the system to know how important or not that is when it gets to the recycle plant. Like, are those boxes then deviated out of the recycle loop because they've got a thermal label on them? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But you would think not, because thermal labels are pretty ubiquitous. But I don't want to apply anything to my packaging that then might prevent it being recycled. So at the moment, I'm printing them on like a home printer and cutting the paper-based tape to fit around the paper-based label, and it's all quite labour intensive, but it's all part of this idea of being as sustainable as possible, and recycling being a big part of that. So for my second word, I chose quality. And this is kind of a 2-part thing. I want to offer a quality product, so when people buy from me, I want them to feel like the product that they receive is a good quality one, that they haven't been kind of shortchanged, or that the photos represented it accurately, etc. To that end, side note, I now offer little videos on Etsy. That's a new feature that Etsy introduced last year. So everything new that's being listed in the shop now gets a little video attached to it, because I think it's important that people feel like they've got a good quality product. And I totally appreciate that one of the issues with buying fabric online is you can't feel it, you can't see it, you don't know if the colour is accurate, etc. So I'm trying to do everything I can to make the listing as quality as possible, so that when people buy the product, they feel like the thing that's in their hand is as quality as they thought it was going to be. So yeah, I would say quality is definitely up there, partly with the product, and also partly just with the whole experience. And experience is actually my third word, so we'll come on to that shortly. But I want people to feel like they've had a quality product and a quality service. So if they had questions, I want to get back to them quickly with those answers. If they had issues, I want to solve those problems for them quickly. Like, some people who live in the local area have asked to pick up fabric in person, and I've always been happy to organise that for them, and then as soon as they've picked it up, quickly refund the shipping back to them, so that they don't feel like I'm holding on to their money for any longer than necessary, do you know? Or if they have questions and they've messaged me, I want to answer those questions for them quickly, so that they can either move on with their search, because I know how frustrating that is for me as a customer if I think I've found something that's perfect, but for some reason, like, the description is lacking or the photos aren't great, and then you message the seller and then it takes them 3 days to get back to you, and you're like, I was kind of ready to make this purchase like 3 days ago, do you know? So yeah, I want someone to feel like they've had a quality service from me, and that the product that they've bought at the end of it is a quality product. And to that end, I guess quality and experience kind of go hand in hand, because partly why I put so much thought into my packaging, coming back to the sustainability element, is obviously there's a lot of sustainability, recycling kind of elements to my packaging, but also that I want someone to feel like when they purchase something from me, they're getting a quality experience. So I know when people buy fabric, often it's a fun purchase, right? Like most of us are buying fabric for our hobbies. I get the odd customer that I think is a shop, but for the most part, I think it's individual people who are buying for, a project that they have at home, like something for fun. And I think for me personally, when I think about the experiences that I have buying fabric or yarn for like my hobbies, is that I like it when it is a bit of an experience, because I don't have a huge amount of spare cash, as I'm sure a lot of us don't. So often when I buy fabric or yarn, it's something that I've thought about for, maybe weeks or months beforehand. Like I've planned what I'm going to make. I've picked the pattern, I've picked the fabric, or I've picked the yarn, and then I've gone through multiple websites to find the exact one that I want. And then the kind of culmination of all of that is the actual purchase. So if the purchase goes well, I want questions to be answered quickly, I want issues with overpayment of shipping to be refunded quickly, etc. And then I want to receive the product and feel like I've got good value for money, right? That I've got a quality product in my hand. And that doesn't necessarily mean to say cheap. Like I might be quite happy to have saved up, birthday money or whatever, to have spent maybe £100 on something for a particularly special project. But when it arrives, I then want to feel like it's a bit of an experience. And it's hard because I think, to loop back to the sustainability element, I don't want a load of unnecessary packaging, right? I want to feel like opening this thing is an experience, because for me that's kind of part of the fun of purchasing something that's for a fun hobby, something I've looked forward to. But I don't want to be wading through like loads of unnecessary tissue paper and sprinkles and glitter and shit plastic crap that I then can't recycle, etc., etc. So I want there to have been thought put into the packaging so that opening it is an experience for me as the consumer, but I don't want to then be left with a load of unnecessary like cardboard or postcards or whatever, things that are just going to be recycled at the end of the day. That for me was the kind of balance of like, I want people when they receive their package to feel like opening it is an experience and a treat for them, but I don't want there to be loads of unnecessary gumph that they then need to dispose of somehow. So that's why I kind of settled on these. It's it is very minimalist in a way. There's a lot of like brown paper, brown card, brown twine, but I like to think that the way it's all kind of put together, it's like a little packet, a present for you, and it's got the little label on with the washing instructions and a little handwritten note that's in a little envelope that you can then reuse or recycle. And I think at this point, there's still some tweaks I'd like to make. I should mention I have stamps, so I have a stamp on the outer envelope with my branding, and then I've got a stamp on a swing label attached to the fabric which has the washing instructions and more branding. And is that all the stamps? Yeah, I think that's all the stamps. But I want someone to feel like when they open the parcel, it's an experience, and it's a quality experience. So that's where the words quality and experience came from. So we've got sustainable, we've got quality, we've got experience. And then the last one I sort of ummed and ahed over. I like it, and I think I'm going to keep it, but I'm just very aware of I don't want to be seen to be performative. And my last word is progressive. And that's because I want my business to be a force for good in the world. Like, ultimately, I'm here to make money. I think I said that in the first episode. I've got, mortgage to pay and, a pension to pay into, etc. But so I want the business to be profitable, and that profit to be money that I can spend on my life. But I also want my business to be a force for good, like I want to give back where I can. So whether that's to charity through donations, or whether that's through a kind of passing the mic. So like I did a post for Black History Month, US Black History Month. I've got another one planned for October for UK Black History Month, where I paid a Black Edinburgh-based sustainable artisan to write a post for my Instagram. and provide me with some pictures, and I posted that onto my Instagram, and I linked to her shop, and I wrote about it in my newsletter. I published her kind of essay in full in my newsletter, and I want to do more of those kind of posts. So sometimes the money that at this point my business can afford to spend is fairly minimal. Like, I'm not profitable yet. All the profit I make, I'm reinvesting back in the business. So, you know, there's a limit to how much, like, of my turnover I can afford to spend on charity, or I can afford to pay for collaborations. But what little I can, I want to give, and I want to use that power in terms of my influence, and I use that word as loosely as possible. But, you know, I've got 2,000 followers on Instagram now, and that's not a huge amount by any means. Like, there's plenty of people out there with more than what I have, but it is a small following, and I can use that as a force for good. You know, I can do more collaborations, I can raise up minority voices where I can, I can pay for pass the mic style Instagram collaborations, or for people to write words that I can publish in my newsletter and link back to their businesses. So there's a lot of ways that my business can give back that isn't just in terms of money donated. And that's what I want to do. I want to be a force for good in the world, for both the environment, but also, I guess, that whole intersectional environmentalism piece of, you know, we want to raise up minority voices, because it's often minorities that are going to be most affected by the effects of climate change. And the reason I hesitated to raise all this here is because it feels a bit like I don't want to be that person that's like, virtue signalling, because I'm very aware that I'm still very new to social justice issues, and I'm still very early on in my education of myself, and I have a lot to learn and a long way to go, but that doesn't mean that I can't start now. Do you know? I think the problem with waiting until you've learned enough or you're experienced enough is that the risk is you never start, because you're never going to be experienced enough or learned enough or whatever. So I would rather start now and be doing something than be silent and doing nothing. That's the small business section. If you've got any comments or questions about my brand values, I would love to have a chat about it. So feel free to pop a comment below. But otherwise, I'm going to take a little break, and then we'll get on with the self section. So for the self section, I've got an audiobook to talk to you about and a knitting project. So I thought I'd start with the knitting project. This project has been going on. I actually went back on my Instagram to try and work out exactly when I cast this on, but I couldn't find a post about it. I think I started this over a year ago, because I distinctly remember putting it down at the start of the pandemic, which was obviously almost exactly a year ago, because it was just a little bit complicated than my brain could kind of process at that particular time. So I set it aside, and I set to basically frogging all of my other sweaters, which you might have seen on Instagram over the course of last summer. But this is a vintage pattern I actually have in my Sierra tote, made with that same green canvas that I made the cutlery roll from. But yeah, that's my knitting project bag. So I've made this pattern once before, and you have to promise not to laugh because it is a children's pattern, but it goes up to a 34-inch
chest, so if you're a small adult, I think it's fine. And I'll put a picture sort of up here or up here. I've made this once before in green, and that one was from years ago, like 4 or 5 years ago, and I've worn that sweater to death. It's still going. I actually mended it this afternoon. I fixed a hole in the oxter, and it's going all like threadbare around the cuffs, and I keep meaning to kind of re-knit the cuffs, but I don't have any of the original yarn, so I would have to go with a yarn that's either going to be as close as possible or maybe like purposefully not matching, like something complementary. So I don't know. I really like it as it is, so I might just leave it. Anyway, I wear that sweater all the time, and it's a proper like throw it on over anything kind of sweater. So I wanted to remake it in a different colour. So my other one's green. This one is this beautiful kind of brick red colour, which if I can work out where I got the yarn from, I will link in the show notes. I can't remember off the top of my head, but if I can work it out, I'll put it in a little tab up the top and I'll link it in the show notes. So, don't laugh, drum roll please. This is the pattern. It is Hayfield 00541. And I don't know if you can see that this pair of youths are wearing this very fetching, the little girl's wearing the cardi version, which I actually haven't made. I've only ever made this, this very dapper gentleman's sweater. I've never worn it with either a beret or a flat cap, but maybe I should. And yeah, it's a kid's pattern, so it goes from a chest size 24, actual measurement 29-inch chest, up to a 38.5-inch chest. But the chest measurements that they have in the fitting are 24-inch to 34-inch. So I made the 32-inch last time, and it's fine. Like, I mean, I'm a size kind of 8-ish UK sizing, and I would say it's fine. So if you made the 34-inch chest, you could probably go up to, I don't know, like a 10 or a 12, depending on how well fitted you want it. I quite like it oversized. That's how I wear my other one. So yeah, I mean, the one that I made for me would probably fit a size 10. So if you went up to the 34-inch chest, it would probably fit maybe a 12 or even a 14 if you wanted a kind of more fitted look. Obviously, it's got no waist shaping because it's designed for children, but I quite like that. And I'm blessed with a small chest and kind of very little waist, so I can kind of get away with that sort of straight up and down kind of style. I guess if you had more hips or more bust, you might want a little bit more shaping potentially, I don't know. So then this probably wouldn't be the pattern for you. But yes, so it's this sweater, this guy that I'm wearing, I'm making at the moment. And yeah, as you can see, it's a vintage pattern. It's basically falling to pieces. I keep meaning to tape it. But it's quite a nice like cable repeat. It's is it 7 or 8? It's 8 rows, but only 2 rows of cable. And then obviously every second row is just like knit the knit stitches, purl the purl stitches. So from that point of view, it's actually fairly straightforward to memorise. And I was quite pleased that I kind of memorised the pattern fairly quickly, so I don't actually have to refer to the pattern that much other than like when to increase and whatnot. So far I have a sleeve. If I show you. So that's gonna, it's I should say you make it in pieces and then you seam it together. So yeah, it seems a little bit snug at the moment, but obviously I'm wearing it over a cardigan. So I've got 2 sleeves. I've just finished the second sleeve. Yep, that's the one. And then it's got this moss stitch at either side, and then I don't know what this is called, bobble stitch I'm going to call it, in the middle, and then the cable rows as well. So that's the 2 sleeves. And then here I've got the back. So the back is just the same, but 4 rows of cabling, and the bobble stitch. I've done an extra long hem, which I'm intending to fold up, so I have like a double thickness, if you can see that, double thickness hem, because in the original sweater I did that for the neckline, and I really like that kind of chunky feel neckline. And I'm also thinking with the cuffs, once they're double thickness, it'll hopefully help them last longer as well. You might notice as I'm waving this around that there's a lot of dingly danglies on the back here, and that is because I made this yarn into the Snoqualmie pattern. I'll link it below, and I'll pop a picture up here of me wearing it. But I made it a couple of years ago, and I wore it quite a lot. But this feels weird to say because this is obviously quite an involved cable pattern as well. But the Snoqualmie was really involved. And it had this like shawl collar, and then you did it up at the front, and it always just felt like fussy to wear, and I felt like I was just constantly adjusting it, and it never kind of sat right. So for all I really like the look of that pattern, and I still occasionally kind of browse the projects on Instagram just to see other people's versions, I just never really felt that comfortable wearing it. So it was an absolute shit ton of work, and it took me months to make, and I wore it for maybe like 3 months, 6 months, and was like, this just isn't doing it for me. And I realised that I wasn't really reaching for it in the mornings when I was getting dressed, so I ripped it all out, which was both heartbreaking and satisfying, because obviously you're liberating the wool, and then you've got all the like inspiration of like, what can I do with this wool, but equally like the hundreds of hours that went into knitting that bloody thing only to sit and have to like frog it was really sad. But the plus side is I remade it into this sweater, and I know for a fact, having worn the green one like to death, that this one is going to get a load more wear. So yeah, I'm glad I've done it. It's going to be a pain in the ass to have to go back and like thread in all of these like teeny tiny dingly dangly bits. So I'm trying to make it so that they all sit on the inside and I don't have to do a huge amount of that at the end, but there is going to be some, sadly. But yeah, I'm enjoying this. It's quite nice to be doing something that I've knitted before, because it's like my brain has now got to this pandemic level where I feel able to, I've adjusted to like the new norm. I feel able to kind of deal with the complexity of this pattern again. But it's also not too complex because I've made it before. I know what I'm doing in general. And so it's kind of a little bit more approachable. I will say this has gone on hold for, so the front is here, and this is as far as I've got of the front. So I haven't even done the bottom band yet. It's gone on hold for the stashless dash bust scarf that was featured in the last episode. I'm on my third version of that, would you believe it? That's how many scraps I've got. And that one's a nice easy one to go for because it's really like brainless. You are just literally like knit, 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 knit. So I can do it without thinking about it. Whereas this one does require a little bit more concentration. And the needles are quite small for this one. So you cast on I think 3.75, and then you move up to 4s for the main body. But it's harder on your hands. You know, it's quite a lot of work to manipulate the yarn and whatnot. Whereas the Stash Dive scarf is literally just like knit, knit, knit. Like I don't even really have to think about it. So I have to admit, this has gone on hold while I finish off the last scarf. But once that one's finished, I've made a promise to myself that I can't cast on anything new until I finish this, because it's been here for bloody ages and it just needs to get off my to-do list. And I want to wear it. Do you know, you get to that point where you're like excited to get it finished because you just want to wear it. Plus, I've already got at least 3 other knitting projects like mentally queued up. So yeah, need to get cracking, which is partly why I wanted to show it off here, because I kind of thought, having committed to it in the newsletter, the podcast, I would have to then check back in maybe a month or 2 to show you the progress that I've done, and that'll kind of spur me on a little bit. So maybe by the April episode it might be seamed up. I would hope by the May episode it'll be done. So watch this space. I'll check back in and tell you. For the last part of the self section, I wanted to tell you all about an audiobook that I've just finished, or I'm nearly finished. It feels a bit weird to be reviewing something that I'm not quite finished with yet, but I've enjoyed it so much that I wanted to share it with you. And I've got my phone here, mostly because I'm not quite sure how to pronounce the author's name, so I find it easier if it's in front of me. So I listened to this on Audible, but you can buy the print copy, and it's called Mudlarking. I don't know if you can see on there what the title looks like, but I'll put a picture up here as well. It's called Mudlarking, and it's by Lara Maiklem. I think that's how you pronounce that, Maiklem, Maiklem. And the subtitle is Lost and Found on the River Thames. And I actually found this book through Instagram, so through Rare Device. If anyone follows her, if you don't follow her, you totally should. So she's an art historian, a lecturer in art history, and she posted about, I think she shared something from Mudlark's Instagram, and it just, I went down a rabbit hole, I clicked on the link, and then I went to Mudlarking's Instagram, and then I went through the grid, and it's fascinating. So this lady, Lara, so she lives in London, and she is a professional mudlark. So for those of you who don't know or haven't come across that before, a mudlark was I think a term coined by the Victorians, is my understanding, and it was basically like the poorest of the poor people who didn't have jobs and didn't have any way of supporting themselves would basically rake through the rubbish in Victorian London. So they would rake through like actual rubbish that had been like deposited in sort of Victorian landfills, and pick out items that could be sold or sold on in some way, and that was how they made their money. So like your street urchin type, and mudlarks were people who did this, but on the banks of the River Thames. So the River Thames is the river that runs through London, and if you're not from Britain, you might not be aware, but the Thames is actually tidal. So there is a tidal, I'm not sure what it's called. I will look that up and I'll put it at the top here. But there's like a barrage that controls the tide in and out of the Thames. But it is tidal, so there are parts of the Thames that will dry out during the day, and then the water will come back and cover that area. And because of the fact that it's tidal, it means that people can get down onto the foreshore of the River Thames, and they can search through the mud and the sand and the silt for items that have been dropped into the river. And obviously there's a lot of like rubbish, flotsam and jetsam. It's a river that runs through like, you know, Britain's capital city, so there's a lot of just detritus that gets lost in it, but it's a river that's run through the capital city for hundreds of years, so there's also a lot of historical artefacts that have been lost in the river over hundreds of years that then get washed up on the foreshore, and they're covered in layers of sand and silt and mud, and over time that in and out of the tide kind of erodes away the land to the point where these items become visible to the naked eye, and that's where your mudlarks come in. So mudlarks are people who go regularly to the foreshore, and they search through the mud and the silt, and they find these items, these artefacts, and then either they keep them for their own collections, or they hand them on to other like museums where they get valued and kind of dated and whatnot. And then depending on what the item is, it might be that the collector can keep it, or it might be that if it's kind of deemed valuable enough. There's one section where Lara talks about what is technically treasure. So under the law, there is a definition for treasure. And if you find something that is technically treasure, then you have to declare it legally. And it goes to, I think, the Museum of London, and their experts will value it. And then I think the money gets split half and half between the person that found it and the people who own the land. So whoever owned that section of the foreshore, they would get some of that money, and then people, if they want to, they can opt to donate that money to, say, the Museum of London to support their work, or they might opt to donate the artefact if the artefact is of like historic value. And it's interesting because I first found out about this on Shannon's Instagram, but then the word mudlark kind of rang a bell because I quite enjoy history. I think I've talked about that previously on the podcast. And a couple of years ago, Andrew had a work due in London. He actually, just to kind of a little wife brag here, he designed and built an art installation that ended up at the V&A Museum in London. His brain baby is what we call it, because he came up with the idea, and then him and his business partner built it, and then the V&A picked it up and had it in an exhibit in London. So he and his business partner were invited to this to the opening of this exhibit, and they each got a +1, so I was lucky enough to go with them. So Andrew and I kind of extended the trip and made it a little bit of a holiday to London, because my parents are actually
stay just outside of London. So I'm fairly comfortable in London in terms of like visiting friends and day trips and things like that, but I very rarely stay in London unless I'm staying like with a friend. So my best friend lives in London, and pre-pandemic I would quite regularly go down and stay with her and her husband in their flat. But Andrew and I would very rarely like go into London and stay in a hotel because London's really fucking expensive, which you might know if you've ever visited. So there's never really been a reason for us to stay in London because we could always get the train back out to where my parents are, and it's a bit more of a hassle and expense, but it's like, you know, a £15 train ticket as opposed to like 150 quid in a hotel. So we could never really justify that expense before, but when Andrew was invited to this opening of this exhibit at the V&A, we were like, well, we've got to make a bit of a thing of this. This is like a big deal in his career. Let's stay in a fancy hotel and just make a bit of a holiday of it. And on the day that he was busy with work, I took myself off for a solo date and I went to the Tower of London. And I really wanted to go because I've read quite a few Tudor history novels and I find that period of time quite interesting, and I used to listen to a podcast about the history of England. And I was wandering around the Tower of London, and they had a whole exhibit in one section from the mudlarks, and it was things that people have found along the foreshore over time that relate in some way or other to the Tower of London. So it was like Tudor and Stuart kind of artefacts, Tudor artefacts I should say, things with like King Henry VIII's head on and stuff like that, you know, and it was really fascinating. And I remember reading a bit, they had a little bit about like the mudlarks, and there is like an official Mudlark Society of London that you have to apply to join, so you can't like, not anybody can just rock in off the street and pick something off the foreshore. You have to be a member of a mudlarking society to do it properly, partly because these items are of historic significance, right? So you don't want just randomers rocking up, being lucky enough to find some Tudor artifact and just popping it in their pocket and walking away. Like, you know, a lot of these artifacts are significant to the history of London and like the UK at large, but also the wider world. Like London was a massive trade centre, so she talks in the book about, there's like a whole story about these like rubies or sapphires that were brought by the East India Company from, you know, all these places that we were exploring like back in the 1800s, and allegedly a bag of these garnets or rubies fell off the back of one of these trading ships into the Thames, and people still to this day find these precious stones, and there's this whole kind of legend and myth about, oh, is it one that came from, you know, like the Caribbean or wherever, and it's all very kind of romantic and historical, but again, you don't want people just like pocketing that and walking away. You want the people who are allowed to scavenge the foreshore to have that sense of responsibility that these things end up where they should, really, in museums, so that people can learn about them, and they're not just like gathering dust in some private collection where they're not really benefiting anybody other than that individual, do you know. So yeah, she talks a bit about like the Mudlarking Society and what you do to be a part of that, and there's like different types of mudlark, and she talks about them as well, because some like her are what she calls gatherers, where they just skim off what they can see on the surface of the foreshore, and they don't use tools, basically. And then there's hunters who go in actively with tools, because if you're a certain grade of mudlark, you are allowed to like excavate, so you're allowed to dig to a certain depth and a certain width, etc. But the problem with that is, obviously, if you're digging into this land, there's a risk, you don't know what's underneath there, there's a risk that you're going to damage some precious artefact. And, you know, like, London's been there since pre-Roman times. Like, some of these artefacts could be like 1,000 years old potentially. So if your indiscriminate spade or trowel just like jags in and destroys some like Roman piece of pottery or whatever, you know, it's not ideal. So she's a little bit like down on the hunters. She's very pro being a gatherer, which I have to say, like, just reading the book or listening to her ear reading, I'm kind of on her team too. But yeah, it's fascinating. It's like kind of little vignettes of history. So there's like a little bit about lost typography, where somebody created their own font and then like tipped it into the Thames, and then people to this day are still looking for this very unusual, very distinctive font. And yeah, these like rubies and garnets. There's bits about like rings that, you know, bits of jewellery that have been found in the Thames, and yeah, it's just really fascinating. I love London. I have a real nostalgia for London because when I was a school kid living at home with my parents, like London was where we used to go for our like days off. Like when I was very small, Mum would take me into London, or my brother into London, on an inset day, like a day off school, and we'd be allowed to pick like our Christmas outfit from C&A, which, if you remember, is a really old school shop that has now long since gone bust, at least in Britain. And then when I was older, as a teenager, I would go into London with my besties, and we'd go to like the enormous Topshop on Princes Street and spend like 4 hours trying on dozens and dozens of clothes and end up buying like one £7 vest top, and the security guards probably hated us. But and now I have a real nostalgia because it's where I go to visit my best friend, and we go fabric shopping and, you know, like wander the streets and get fancy coffee, and obviously there's that added bittersweetness of having not been able to do that for the last year. So yeah, I'm excited to get back to visiting London and seeing all my friends, but this mudlarking book really gave me a bit of a history of London, which I found really fascinating. Kind of fed that little nostalgia bit that and yeah, I would definitely recommend. Thanks so much for joining me in this March episode. I can't believe I'm 3 episodes in already. If you're a newsletter subscriber, I hope you enjoyed the little sneak preview of the vintage Laura Ashley fabric you got the other day. If you're not a newsletter subscriber, why are you not a newsletter subscriber? Get down to the comments, the description below, and click the link and get yourself signed up. I'm hoping to do some more fabric shop date episodes as Andrew calls them. And I've already got April, May and half of June's episodes planned, so stick with me. I'm really enjoying doing this for you, and I really hope you're enjoying it. If you've liked it, be sure to like and subscribe, and tell a friend. I would love it if you could give me a like on this video, because it makes me like tear up a little bit, and it makes me realise that people are actually watching it and enjoying it. And I'll see you again in April. Bye! Softy. Oh, baby. There we go. Right. You're not